Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and if you've ever wondered why your cable or streaming TV bill keeps going up, it's likely due to stories like the one we're going to look at today, where a local broadcast conglomerate is trying to strong-arm a local cable company into paying more money that they will pass along to their customers to pick up channels that those customers may not even be watching or want to watch. But this is an example of how bad this industry has become and why our bills keep going up. This is a juicy story because it actually looks at the inner workings of one of these negotiations, which are usually opaque to the public and regulators. But this cable company that's getting strong-armed allegedly has made a filing with the FCC and put it all out in the open. So why don't we take a look at that right now? And before we jump into this story, I do want to let you know that this video is being brought to you by all of you. That includes everyone who watches this channel and subscribes to it, along with those of you who have also contributed to the channel, either through my donor box page at Lon.TV/support, through Patreon, the YouTube membership program, or Floatplane, and of course those of you who have picked up some merch from the merch store that you can find in the lower shelf as well. I want to thank everyone for their continued support of the channel. And now let's get into this week's topic and see why we're all paying so much money for cable. Now, the complaint with the FCC was filed by Altafiber. They are actually the old phone company out of Cincinnati, Ohio. As you can see here in the filing, Cincinnati Bell is the parent company. And what they offer are broadband products like internet, but they also have a cable TV component where you can subscribe and get a bunch of channels delivered to your home over their wires. Now, back in the old days, cable TV operators were required to carry all of the local stations that were in range of their customer base over their wires. But in the 80s, that was ruled unconstitutional. And so what happened was the requirement for must carry ended with two court cases in 1985 and 1987. And then Congress stepped in 1992 with the Cable Act, which allowed broadcasters to either require the cable company to carry their network, or the broadcasters could ask to be paid for the cable company to carry their network. And I'm sure you can guess what the broadcasters by and large have opted for, which is requiring the cable companies to pay them for that broadcast network to be put onto the cable system. And the same is true now with streaming companies, although there are slightly different rules related to streaming, which we'll get into later in the video here. And essentially what happens is that the cable company and the broadcaster every couple of years sit down to negotiate how much it's going to cost to carry the local network on the cable system. So undoubtedly, you've likely seen stories like the one I have up on screen here, where the local broadcasters pull all of their stations from the cable lineup, and then they have this big back and forth with the cable company, and they try to get you to call and complain, and eventually they settle on a deal which just raises your bill up a bit more. In my market here, Comcast at the end of the year was charging $32.75 for just the broadcast TV feed. And that didn't include all the other stuff that Comcast charges you. And that fee alone, in the course of a week, went from that to $37.50. And throughout the year, they keep nudging it up, and it sits outside of your contract. So every time one of these agreements comes down, they can raise your bill whenever. And the cable company just passes it along, and it just keeps bringing the cost of cable TV higher. And this was what got me finally to cut the cord. I was just sick of paying for things that I really wasn't watching. And that's what this big dispute here before the FCC is all about. So Altafiber is having an issue with Nexstar, who owns TV stations throughout the United States, including one that is partially in the market that Altafiber is operating in. Now, Nexstar not only owns local television stations, they also have a network. The CW is owned by them. They have a political website and media company called The Hill. They have two retro sub-channels, Antenna TV, which broadcasts the old Johnny Carson episodes at night, along with Rewind TV. They own a radio station, WGN, I believe that's out of Chicago. And they also have a cable TV news channel that launched not all that long ago called News Nation. And they launched that to compete with CNN, Fox, and MSNBC, which is probably not a good business decision given the state of cable television at the moment. But who needs good economics here when you can just force it upon people? So what Altafiber is alleging in this complaint is that Nexstar is forcing them to renew News Nation in order to get the local TV station too. And they say that this shouldn't be allowed under FCC rules because a broadcast retransmission agreement has nothing to do with carriage of a cable channel. But that is apparently what Nexstar has been doing here to this cable company. In fact, they say that they had agreed to carry News Nation along with this station in their prior agreement, but they found that very few of their subscribers are watching it, and therefore they don't feel it's justified to have to pay what they say is 15 times the rate of inflation for News Nation's increased renewal fee, along with what this TV station would cost to continue carrying. They also allege here that within their cable subscription area, only 900 Altafiber subscribers are actually living in the market for this Dayton television station, yet they say Nexstar is forcing them to pay to include News Nation for all 87,000 of their subscribers. Now, you'll note in their complaint that Altafiber said that News Nation had low viewership and low engagement. And what they meant by engagement was how many of their 87,000 subscribers complained when News Nation was pulled off when this agreement expired. They said roughly 30 customers out of the 87,000 contacted Altafiber to express displeasure. Now, as a cord-cutting nerd, what interested me about this filing is that we get a little bit of the inside baseball to these negotiations. So you can see that on June 3rd, Altafiber said they made a counterproposal to carry News Nation, but only for the subscribers in the Dayton DMA where this station is located. And then on June 6th, they said Nexstar rejected that counterproposal and just reiterated their standalone offer. In other words, Nexstar said, take it or leave it. Now, the reason why they're filing this with the FCC is that there is some provision in the law that prohibits television stations from negotiating in bad faith. So they're trying to use that legal argument as to why the FCC should take up the case. They also talk about how much money Nexstar is making from these retransmission fees. So in 2023, they said $2.57 billion of Nexstar's revenue came from subscription fees and not from advertising. And News Nation, they say, is profitable just because of this, not because of its viewership. And this is one of the issues today with television, is that we're all paying for stuff that we don't watch. And apparently this business model doesn't need customers anymore. So long as somebody's paying a fee and is too lazy to cancel their service, they just keep collecting money, and that's worth about $2.5 billion apparently. Now, you might see some ads in the coming weeks here from the National Association of Broadcasters because they feel like they are at war with what they say is big tech. Now, they claim that streaming companies are not subject to the same regulations that they are. They are correct to some degree because streaming companies are not operating broadcast television stations over the public airwaves. There's nothing preventing these television broadcasters from streaming and avoiding all of that regulation, but they want to hold on to those television broadcast frequencies. And what they're asking for from the FCC is some additional deregulation so they can charge us even more money. And some of the local broadcasters are even going so far as to say that this is like Winston Churchill getting ready to go into war, and that the entire industry depends upon this deregulation. You can also read this letter that the NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters, filed with the FCC when the new chairman took over. And one of the things they are asking for are changes to broadcast ownership rules, because right now these big conglomerates cannot own too many TV stations, given some of the regulations that have been in place for a long time. But we're seeing, though, just how bad it gets when these companies get larger. They have much more leverage that they can place upon local cable companies, and even the big ones, too, by requiring customers like us to pay for things that we're not watching. And this only makes it worse if they are able to expand their reach. And in fairness, their business model is changing, but unfortunately, their overall sense of economics here is just not right. They just don't have the customers to be charging what they're trying to charge here. And if they don't wake up to that fact, things are going to get really bad for them, no matter how many stations they're allowed to own. Now, another big ask that the NAB is making to the FCC against big tech is this issue of how streaming providers like YouTube TV and Hulu Live TV are negotiating these retransmission agreements. So right now, YouTube TV and Hulu can negotiate with the national networks for all of the affiliates across the country, regardless of who owns the affiliate. What the broadcasters want is to be able to strong-arm YouTube, Hulu, and all these other streaming providers the same way they're doing to the local cable companies like Altafiber here. So guess what that means? That means the already gigantic bill you're paying to YouTube TV to the tune of $83 a month is only going to go up when the broadcasters get their way. And I am very confident that they will be granted the ability to do this. So get ready. That bill is going to be going up a lot more and probably more frequently when YouTube and Hulu and everybody else have to negotiate with these stations the same way the cable companies do. So why not put up an antenna? That's what I did. Well, a couple of weeks after I put up this antenna, the new TV standard that is about to get rolled out here in the US got hit with digital rights management, DRM, which means that you can't watch it all that conveniently. You got to buy these lousy boxes to tune it. I've got a whole series on how bad this encryption is going to be for people that put the antenna up to avoid all these transmission fees. These broadcasters need that revenue, and they're going to make it as inconvenient as possible to get TV over the air, yet they still want the privilege of the frequencies that belong to the public. I've talked about this a lot here. Again, check out the link and you'll get all the details about how all of this works. But the crazy thing here is that this entire DRM scheme, which is supposedly protecting them against big tech, is actually dependent upon big tech to work because the encryption algorithms are Google's. The only way you can watch this stuff on a set-top box is through a Google Android box. And they're using Amazon servers to store all the encryption data because your television has to go over the internet in many cases to get the encryption certificate to watch live over-the-air television. It's the most ridiculous thing ever. You all know the story here, but for those of you who don't, definitely dive in and learn more about it because it's a downright mess. So guess what? Your TV bill is going to go up again, so you may want to start strategizing some ways to avoid that when it happens. But I thought this was a really interesting window into how all of this negotiation works behind the scenes, because it usually is not something we, the public, or even the FCC is privy to. So we'll keep an eye on this case and see what happens. But again, buckle up and just start shelling out some more cash for TV. It's only going to go up from here. That'll do it for now. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.